The signs of a new age were everywhere. It was hard to miss. This was a new age. One sign was that there was now laws. People had felt that their culture had gotten decadent. One sign, fewer people were having children. Fewer people were getting married. And in this new age, there were now laws to promote marriage. If you're a woman between 20 and 50, you were supposed to be married, and for men, 25 to 60. If you had 3 children or more, the state would now give you benefits, whether you were a man or a woman. There were laws against adultery, because that had been a problem. The signs of a new age were everywhere, and another sign was that a year after these laws were first issued, the first citizen, the princeps, had declared a festival, hadn't had in Rome in about a couple hundred years, a festival, the secular games, secular here meaning age. It's a new age. In Roman accounting, 100 or 110 years, that was a new age. They hadn't had a secular game since maybe 250 BC, but in 17 AD, 17 BC, excuse me, Augustus said, this is now a new age, we're going to draw a line, and we're now going to have these games. The signs of a new age were everywhere. And I think for a lot of Roman citizens, this might have been a good thing, finally. After 100 years of civil war and all this death and bloodshed, and our culture becoming decadent, finally someone is going to do something about it. Some moral legislation, no more political arguments that lead to civil war and death, thank God. Now there were sort of some elements of dissonance if you listened closely. So if you were not married, if you were one of these people who were not married, you were 20 to 50 or 25 to 60, what that meant is you couldn't inherit property given to you by people who were not in your family. Now someone pointed out, well, the emperor himself, or not, he didn't call himself the emperor, the first citizen, the princeps, he only had one child, and he got a lot of property from people who were not his family. Did that not count for him? And then in that wonderful games, the secular games, another point of dissonance was the emperor had asked Horace, great poet Horace, to write a poem for the occasion. We know he did this because in 1890 in Italy, they discovered a big marble stone that had the official acts of the games written, recorded out. And in there it says, this poem was written by Horace, right in the marble. So we know he wrote this poem, but it's sort of an odd poem because it's really propaganda. And there's this very strange line right at the beginning of the poem that says, "Oh, goddess, please bring forth the progeny, and please further the decrees of the Senate concerning the conjoining of women and the marriage law that is productive of fruitful new progeny." Doesn't really roll off the tongue. Sort of a strange kind of thing that Horace is writing. And then you realize, oh, Horace was 53, a bachelor his whole life, never married himself. And how did he feel when the emperor said to him, I have an idea, why don't you write me a poem in honor of these games? And so you can see now there are these 2 choruses of young boys and girls singing at the games in 17 AD, 27 boys, 27 girls, this poem by Horace that is now praising the decrees of the Senate in sort of an odd way. So there was definitely some signs of dissonance. But if you wanted to object in a more, let's say, fundamental way, what recourse did you have? A moment like today where one of our national leaders says he wants more babies in our country, so that maybe the implication is we can have fewer immigrant babies because they obviously can't become citizens in the same way that the rest of us, or some of us in this room, are real citizens of the United States. Besides dissenting on the margins, is there something that can get us at the root of what is going on? The dean mentioned that today is the Feast of the Presentation. So I want you to think about these laws that Augustus promulgated in 18 BC, promoting marriage and childbirth, with what is happening with Joseph and Mary as they present Jesus at the temple. So what Luke is doing here, he says he's referring to the old law, but there's actually several different laws or customs that he's sort of combining into one scene, and I think it's helpful to unravel them as we think about here in this story. Can this give us a sense of how we might push back on what is happening? So the first is this idea of purification, that after a woman gave birth, you had to come to the temple and get purified. Now, yes, we might say, well, that's so old-fashioned, and obviously, you religious people always with human sexuality and the need for purification. No, not like that. In Leviticus 12, when it's talking about purification, it's because childbirth back then, and sometimes today, was almost as dangerous for women as going to war was for men. So if you had been in childbirth, you had gone to the borderlands between life and death. And if you had made it back successfully, that was something to thank God for. And so that's what that was about. That's what the Levitical law was about, to say, thank you, God, that we have gone through the borderlands between death and life, and that this woman has come through safely. And up until the 1928 prayer book, we had a similar service called the Churching of Women. And if you look at it, same thing. It just begins and ends with the priest and the woman thanking God that she has made this journey safely, and that she has now a baby safely. So that's the first thing. The second thing is this idea in Exodus where the firstborn eldest son, so for your eldest boy who opens the womb, as they say, had to be given to God, and then you redeemed him back for a few shekels. Right? And this refers back to the Passover story that we had to give the firstborn for us to get out of Israel, but really a larger idea that the children that we have, everything we have, belongs to God. And so originally the idea is you bring the child, firstborn eldest child, to God, say, this is yours, God, and then you sort of buy him back, you redeem him. In this case, as you notice, there was no redemption, there was no giving of shekels, because Jesus sort of belongs to God. And so how do these ideas, these related ideas, give us the basis for pushing back on what seems like a ostensibly fine idea? Let's have more children, let's get married. Sure, fine. I have 4, so I feel pretty good. But how can we get underneath what we know is the propaganda behind that idea? That is not just about having more families, which, good, if you want that, great. How do we use these two ideas to get to that? And the first is this, is that when you give your child and you bring him, and Jesus is brought to the temple, but all of us, that child belongs to God. My children belong to God. My life belongs to God. Your lives belong to God, not to the state. My 4 children were not given to me as a gift from God to glorify the United States of America so that we could have less immigration. Right? They are a gift from God, and they belong to God, not to the state. And so let's start there. Let's start by remembering that no matter what, even though for most of my life anyway, the laws and our values of our country seemed recognizably Christian, now they are seeming something a little different. And so in that world then, I'm not going to follow Caesar or our new Caesar or the new princeps or the new first citizen or the new whatever we're calling it. I'm going to follow God, wherever that leads. My life is God's, so is your life. And let's begin there with the root. The second, to think about that first idea of being on the borderlands of death and life, is that no matter how much this new regime will try to tell us, we cannot force people to love each other. You can't force them to have healthy children for the state. Life will always intervene. There will always be danger when it comes to things like giving birth. And so we might then think, oh, so then some of these techniques that we have developed through history to protect a woman's health, maybe they are not just a simple black and white question of morality or women being a little too loose with their morals, and that's why they had to have this health. Maybe they developed because for a long time, childbirth was really dangerous, and we were trying to make it less dangerous for women. And so again, that is not something that the state should have control over. Really, the larger point is that as we think about pushing back, not just on the margins, not just sort of criticizing the leader, saying, hey, the leader seems to be a hypocrite, but from a really deep moral sense, is that all of our private lives, our religious beliefs, how we choose or not choose to have families, whether we choose to utilize certain reproductive techniques or not, all of our private lives are our own, and they should not be determined by the needs of the state. No one can force us to do that, but moreover, it's not a matter of forcing, that is what God demands. God demands a higher loyalty to God. And let's end here. Now you might say, well, that sounds interesting. That's sort of what they're saying. They're saying they're on Team Jesus, and they're going to create laws to help Team Jesus win. You're saying you're on Team Jesus too. Aren't you essentially saying the same thing? And no. And this is where it gets the heart and the paradox of our faith. When we give our lives, our allegiance to Jesus and to God, we are saying we are going to love someone who gave up his own life to other people, who said, you must love your enemies. You must not make these boundaries and say, oh, you're a Christian, you're on the inside, you're a member of this country, you're a member of my family and my community, therefore I can love you. And then maybe if I have enough love, because there isn't enough to go around the world, I might be able to have a little bit of love for people maybe in my state, but certainly maybe not enough love to help people from over there beyond my country's borders. But that is the exact opposite of the lesson that Jesus teaches us, and that is what is so confusing and hard but life-giving about the message, that when you give your life to Jesus, Jesus is saying, your love, first of all, is not a scarce resource that you have to husband and only give to your inner circle. You have to give away your love. You have to give it away. That's what I did for you on the cross. You didn't deserve it. I don't know you. You're not my friend or family member. You betrayed me, disciples. You betrayed me, church. You continue to betray me, yet I still love you. And that is what we must remember to do. That no matter what they say, when we say our lives belong to God, that my children's life, my life, your life belongs to God, we are committing to a way of life that is going to give away love. Say, it is not a finite resource, it is an infinite resource. I'm going to give away my love, even at the cost of my own life, even at the cost of what seem like these boundaries of our national identity. Even at the cost of those things, erasing those things. That our love for other people has to go beyond that. And maybe from that point, we might find the basis of pushing back against what we're experiencing today.